So thanks everyone for joining us on Zoom tonight for another artist studio tour. As you know, my name is Angela McQuillan and I run the Esther Klein Gallery that's part of the Science Center. So since the gallery's closed due to the pandemic, we've been doing a series of tours inside artist studios to get a deeper look into their practice. Tonight we'll be talking with artist Rebecca Kamen, so this is a real treat. I'm excited. I met Rebecca back in 2016 when I was working at the Penn Network Visualization Program, which was a residency at University of Pennsylvania for high school and college students to gain experience working with neuroscientists studying brain networks. And Rebecca was invited to be a guest speaker to talk about her collaborations with scientists. So after that meeting, I invited her to do a solo exhibition at Esther Klein Gallery in 2017 called Continuum, which was a retrospective of her work. Rebecca Kamen is a sculptor and lecturer on the intersections between art and science. Her artwork is inspired by her research into cosmology, history, and philosophy. She studied rare books and manuscripts at various scientific libraries, including the Chemical Heritage Foundation in Philadelphia. She's also researched on collaborative projects at places including the Center for Astrophysics at Harvard University, the Kavli Institute at MIT, and also at NIH. She's exhibited widely nationally and internationally, including in China, Hong Kong, Korea, Austria, Chile, Egypt, Spain, Australia, and Singapore. She's the recipient of a Virginia Museum of Fine Arts Professional Fellowship, and she's a professor emeritus at Northern Virginia Community College. She's also currently serving as artist in residence in the Computational Neuroscience Initiative and the Department of Physics and Astronomy at the University of Pennsylvania. So she's very accomplished. Everyone please welcome Rebecca Kamen.
Well, first of all, thank you, Angela, who is just an incredible curator, both at Esther Klein Gallery and also for this artist Zoom series. I'd also like to thank the staff at Venture Cafe for their technical support for this program and for the Science Center for creating and supporting this program. I'd also, if Margarita's on the line, I want to thank her, who's an artist and dear friend, for assisting me with a Zoom tutorial so I could figure out how this all worked. Finally to Mother Nature, who knocked out our power 2 hours ago, but also brought it back on. So she always lets us know when she's upset about something. So anyway, I'm going to talk a little bit tonight about some recent work that I'm dealing with. And I want to start by saying that everything in nature tells us its story. Artists and scientists use their work to tell nature's story, as maybe some of you do as artists or writers or dancers. For me, curiosity and the discovery process were planted at a young age, collecting all types of natural objects such as shells, stones, leaves, seed pods. And as an adult, I continue to collect and fill my home and studio with natural objects, sparking curiosity and ideas for the development of my work. And I want to start out by showing you one object here. And it has some cryptic words here. It says Boston Model L. And you might be wondering, some of you might be wondering what this is. If you're old enough, like some of us, you'll know that it's a pencil sharpener. But it's not just any pencil sharpener. It's a pencil sharpener that I found when I moved into my home and studio. And this is a house in the Chestnut Hill area of Philadelphia that actually had an artist studio. And this pencil sharpener belonged to the original owner, Carolyn Haywood, who was a children's book author and artist. So I'm starting off my program with a nod to Carolyn, whose studio that I get to be inspired in on a daily basis. The other things I want to show, I don't know if you can see it, but this is a crystal. I actually collect crystals. I'm very fascinated by these natural objects because they're embedded with all kinds of materials. This one has some dendritic material that looks almost like a neuron if you've looked at a neuron under a microscope. And another one I have, I don't know if you can see this, but it's been hit with lightning, because the interesting thing about quartz crystals is they're piezoelectric, so they conduct electricity, which is why we use them in our watches. And then finally, the last bit of show and tell I want to show you is something that's very special and near and dear to me. Let me see if I can back this up so you can see more of it. This is what's called a Lubo memory chart. And this is from the Congo in Africa. And what's very interesting about this, you can see it, it has all these tiny little beads. And this was a mnemonic device that was developed to help people in this particular tribe to remember things. And for me, this is of great interest because I study, along with creating art, I study neuroscience. Not that I'm trained in this area, I'm more curious. So these are some of the objects that are very curious for me and objects that I surround myself with on a daily basis. Through scientific research and dialogues with scientists, I analyze what I'm understanding and I communicate my observations and discoveries through art. And moving to Philadelphia several years ago provided an opportunity to work with scientists who investigate curiosity and the creative process in art and science, both at the University of Pennsylvania and also working with scientists at American University in Washington, D.C. This process has taken me on an incredible journey about my own process of discovery and how I use it to develop artwork, and also for creating bridges between different scientific fields. In today's presentation, we will investigate this process of discovery both through artwork and through data visualization, which is something that I've just started to do with some of the scientists down at UPenn. The presentation will conclude by discussing how crisis can provide opportunities for discovery in art, which I think is extremely appropriate at this moment in time. Okay, I am going to attempt to work my magic here, my PowerPoint magic. Let's see, I have to share this.
It's a green arrow at the bottom.
Yep. Okay, and.
We got it, we can see it.
All right, wait. Perfect. Okay, I always like to start talking about some of my early tools of discovery. You see the microscope, which probably looks like an antique for people who work with that. The chemistry set, which would be illegal in this day and age, and my personal favorite, the telescope, which my dad and I built when I was probably about 12 years old. We went across to Edmunds Scientific Company because I actually grew up in Philadelphia, Mount Airy. So these are three items that are very near and dear to me. Also growing up in Philadelphia, there were certain experiences at the Franklin Institute that really planted a lot of seeds for discovery and for my curiosity, the heart model, and also that insect-looking thing, pre-digital, which is a planetarium. I also had an extraordinary experience when I was in the 5th grade. I was taken to a field trip and put in front of this painting, which is Nude Descending the Staircase. I had never, ever seen anything like it in my life. I remember buying a little postcard to take home to my parents because it was so unusual to me. So that painting really planted a lot of seeds. It also has to do with the fourth dimension of time, which was something that Duchamp was quite fascinated with. And then this, I decided to put this in at the last minute because it has to do with one of the things that I love to do, which is travel all over to do lectures. And so this is one of the first times I was on TV when I was in the 6th grade on an educational cable program called Everyone's an Artist. What's significant to me looking at this now as an adult artist is even in the 6th grade, I was fascinated with patterns, and patterns are one of the things that really are quite significant for people in both art and science. This is another image that I just put in Because another thing that's significant in my art practice is artist residencies. And my work in this area started very early in my career. You can probably see from the early 70s. And I was selected to be an artist in residence put in a mill community in South Carolina. And it was the first time I had ever lived in the South. And you see this student that I'm working with a wire sculpture. And then what's so incredible is this drawing. And I don't know if you can see it, but the little girl on this drawing is saying that she liked being a sculptor because it made her feel big, like she could do anything. And I love that those seeds and the impact that we have as human beings, even for someone starting early in their teaching career, to be able to hold that light for younger people. I'm going to fast forward now to 2012. Those early seeds for an interest in collaboration and working with people manifested in a wonderful artist residency, very totally unexpected. I had been invited to go up to NIH to do a lecture. There was a neuroscientist in the audience. I wasn't even aware it was to an audience of neuroscientists. He was so taken by my work and to my lecture that he invited me to be in residence. They had never done that before. And what this image shows is the range of research of scientists who I got to intersect with during that opportunity. The thing that really was a catalyst for this was this neuroscientist invited me after the lecture to come to his office, and he started to show me drawings of Santiago Ramon y Cajal, who's the father of modern neuroscience. And I was just blown away. I was so moved seeing these drawings. I had never seen anything quite like it. And seeing this particular drawing of the retina, which was this particular scientist's area of expertise, helped me to realize this sculpture, which it has been inspired by that particular drawing, and it's called Illumination. So it's sort of my interpretation of the human retina. So what you're seeing here, just to give you an idea, all my work is all hand cut. So you're seeing layers and layers of painted mylar that are cut, hand cut, and then put together to create a piece. This particular piece is 3 feet by 3 feet and comes out of the wall about 10 inches, just to give you an idea of the scale of it. This is another piece inspired by my research up at NIH. Up on the upper left, you see this beautiful drawing of Santiago Ramon y Cajal. He identified what we call growth cones, which are on the end of neurons. And so what I did was I wanted to create a response to this, not so it looked like an actual growth cone, but the notion of a cone form. And again, this is also 3 feet, 36 inches. And to try to connect some of the dynamic feature of what a growth cone does in the neuron. One of the outcomes of that residency was my philosophy of dream big or go home. When I first got to NIH, I was so moved by Cajal's drawing that I talked to Jeff, my mentor, and I said, can we get some of these here at NIH? Well, it turns out they're considered national treasures. Cajal was from Madrid, and Jeff and I were invited to Madrid to do lectures, and we actually negotiated to bring an ongoing exhibition of these at the new Porter Neuroscience Research Center. So I'm very proud to be part of something that people said couldn't be done. And I would like to think when you put a neuroscientist and artist together, all things are possible.
Is that installation still there now?
Yes, and they rotate the drawings. And this has been going probably since 2013, which is amazing. This is even predates the drawings that were in New York at the Gray Art Museum. We were the first ones to be able to bring them to the United States. These are two sculptures also that developed as a result of that exhibition, or not only the exhibition, but also of my research there, that are permanently installed. I did about 10 or 12 pieces that I gifted to NIH that are permanently installed in the neuroscience building. But these two are right across from that drawing exhibition. So it really means a lot to be in the company of Cajal and these just profound drawings. Another aspect or another development of the work with NIH and also research I was doing at the same time at the Center for Astrophysics at Harvard was an installation called Neurocantos. So I deal a lot with interpreting scientific phenomena, and I think to most people, when you talk about certain phenomena, their eyes glaze over. So my idea is to interpret phenomena in terms of a installation so people can walk through it and experience it, or at least my interpretation of it. And I'm really fortunate in that many of these installations, I get to work with a wonderful sound artist, Susan Alexander, who I know is on board right now. Unfortunately, I can't play any of the sound. We weren't sure if the sound was going to work. But if you're interested in hearing the extraordinary soundscapes that Susan creates to go with all these different installations, you can find them on my website. So Neurocantos actually started with a dialogue I had with a poet who I met at the Salzburg seminar, global seminar back in 2015. I connected with a poet. We were there working on a seminar dealing with the neuroscience of art. And I really deeply connected with this poet around socks that we were wearing. So sometimes socks that you wear can really have an impact on connecting with people. But anyway, when we got back from Austria, Stephen and I started having this incredible written dialogue. And what he would do is take information from my dialogue and my insights, and he would turn them into poetic form. And so what you're seeing here is one of his poems, which is a response to an ongoing dialogue we've had about the nature of the mind. So that was also part of the Neurocantos exhibition. This is an actual installation view. Each of the cones, suspended cones, represent neuronal networks. And then at the bottom, you see these mandala-like shapes. Those represent patterns at both the micro and macro scale. And that's the really extraordinary thing when you start studying science, is that you start noticing these patterns. Like the patterns in the brain are very similar to the leafing structure that you see in trees and branching structure. And so what I wanted to do was to create an installation that celebrated this range of possibility at both the micro and macro level. Each one of the forms in the center is a beautiful fossil that also has a similar pattern form. And so Susan created this beautiful soundscape where she took the poet speaking and also someone speaking, a Spanish-speaking person speaking the words of Santiago Ramon y Cajal. And it's a beautiful spoken word soundscape. So a lot of times it makes you feel like the thoughts that are going on in your own brain. We actually installed this at the Esther Klein Gallery. It was interesting because we thought that the floor might, be a visual distraction to it. So Angela was kind enough to have these white forms, stands built to put under it. But what we found is that the patterns of the marble really sort of mimic the patterns of the brain. So to me, it really enhanced the sense of this installation in this particular space. And I love the fact of inviting people like dancers to come and to interpret what they're understanding and their reaction to the particular piece. When I got to the University of Pennsylvania, probably about a year or two ago, One of the people that I connected with was Danny Bassett, who runs a complexity systems lab. And as we were talking, she said, you know, based on me knowing you for the last couple of years, I bet you'd be interested in the study that we're working on dealing with curiosity. And all of a sudden, my curiosity started to get piqued. And so since I've been working pretty exclusively at the intersections of art and science, probably since about 2011, I felt like I was at an age where I was trying to understand what enabled me to see and do and bring together what I do in my artwork. So anyway, she got me involved with one of her postdocs that did this, what's called the KNOT study, KNOT meaning knowledge networks over time. And what was fascinating for me to realize is that the brain, when it starts connecting knowledge, is very what we call architectonic. You have this geometry that's going on in your brain at such a micro level, and ideas and thoughts coming together. I was just fascinated by that. And so I thought, wow, I really want to investigate this more. And then I started realizing that there is this whole architecture of knowledge, of how knowledge sort of forms and comes together. And that's one of the things that Danny's lab studies is these types of relationships and how these are formed. And one component of it is this notion of curiosity. So I actually created this piece when I was at NIH back in 2012 called The Energy Landscape, not really fully understanding the significance of it to me, but now I do, working, you know, with that lab, with Danny and with her postdocs. And what you're seeing on the left-hand side is the energy landscaping of what happens in the brain when we start bringing knowledge together, when we start connecting the dots of knowing and understanding. So what I'm going to do now is, one of the things that I got to do with one of the postdocs was, I was really curious to see what the knot relationships were with an installation project that I did called Divining Nature in Elemental Garden. In 2009, I had this vision. I was supposed to do something with the periodic table of elements. And what I decided to focus on were these electron orbital patterns. And I was really fortunate because I also connected, again, with Susan Alexander, my collaborating partner, with sound, and we got to investigate this together using both visuals and sound. And so anyway, what you see here is a vision I had, which is to take all the elements on the columns and to put them on their own rotating Fibonacci spiral. And the original exhibition space was hexagonal, so it really sort of enhanced, I thought, this experience. So the idea was to take that rigid gridded chart and turn it into a garden of atomic flowers. So you could walk through it and you could experience it by meditating on it, or trying to understand its beauty and its meaning. So this is the finished piece. And again, I encourage you to go on my website to listen to this beautiful sound component that Susan created. And you can learn more about it. She has a beautiful statement on the website. But the reason I'm showing you this is because I went and I met with one of Danny's postdocs, because I wanted to understand the whole process of my curiosity and discovery in the development of this piece. And so what you're seeing now is an animation that is based on semantics of me basically doing a lecture on this to David, who was the postdoc. And what he has done is to take this process of discovery and animate it so I could see in real time my process of discovery. This was a revelation for me, because you never think of what these knowledge networks as being dynamic, or the way you put them together as being dynamic. And I love the fact that a scientist could take what I was doing and then illustrate it in such a way that it enabled me to understand the whole dynamics of what we do on a daily basis. Another student in the lab, Dale Zhao, who did another representation of this based on a sequence of ideas by semantics. This is what it looks like. I couldn't believe it. I was almost moved to tears when I saw how complex what is going on in your head just to come up with one idea. Now, fasten your seatbelts, because this is what it looks like as it's coming together in real time. This is the pathways of all these ideas and how they form. I have to tell you, the first time I saw this, it really produced vertigo for me. I just couldn't believe it. But it'll give you an idea of what goes on in your brain every time you come up with any kind of idea. So along with this study that I'm working on at Penn, I'm also working on another project in preparation for a large exhibition in fall 2021 at American University in Washington, DC. And for this project, working with scientists. I have a group of scientists that I just started to work with. And I want to show you some of the process that I do. So this particular scientist works with the cerebellum. And what's so interesting to me about the cerebellum is it's a part of the brain, but it's in two hemispheres. So if you think about the larger brain, obviously that's in two hemispheres. Then you have this like miniature small form, the base of the neck. And what I distilled out of reading this scientist's research, I put into this piece, which actually celebrates this notion of the two hemispheres. And the other thing that was very interesting to me about this particular component of the brain is it has the most diversity of neurons of anything in the brain, which I wasn't aware of. So that's what those forms that look very river-like celebrate. Another scientist I'm working with up there does a lot of research with solar dynamics, which is of great interest to me because I've spent some time up at the Center for Astrophysics back in about 2011 in their solar lab. I'm very interested in the electromagnetic fields that come out of the sun. And so that inspired a piece called Flare. And again, this is painted mylar. It's very dimensional. The other piece also painted mylar with steel wire. And this piece hangs off of the wall because flares are very fascinating to me. When I was up in Boston for this research, I nearly couldn't fly home because the electromagnetic solar activity was so great that they thought they were going to have to cancel flights. So it's so fascinating to me, something so far away can impact things, you know, here on Earth. Another, their head of their physics department sent me this image called quantum quilts. And sometimes it's really fun for me just to respond to something without even really knowing what it's about. I love the grid at the top and, you know, how it's been sort of bisected and then it covered over a sphere and how that changes the dynamics, you know, of something that's flat. And that inspired this particular piece. I'm very interested in things having to do with what are called fundamental forces, like how exterior forces impact things. And that's what I think those quantum quilts are about is, you know, I've studied general relativity a little bit and how certain fundamental forces can take something, what we appear as flat, and really make it be very dynamic and dimensional. Another scientist who actually was at Penn, who now heads up the computer science program at American University. This was so interesting to me. And again, just trying to distill what I'm understanding about the research, certain things really stood out for me. Dynamic information, mechanical properties of cloth. I mean, this is something that is being studied from a psychological standpoint. And so for me, I interpreted that by creating something that I felt really interpreted what I was understanding about her research. Here's a close-up of that again, painted mylar with steel wire. And again, all this stuff is done by hand. I find as I get older, for me, the way I do my work is a real meditation. And when you're dealing with things like scientific ideas, sometimes just wrapping, cutting, for me is something that really enables me to have breakthroughs in understanding of what I'm looking at. I'm going to be ending my talk today by something that's very personal to me, but especially at the time that it happened. But I feel it's something that we can all really understand and accept at this moment in time. When I was up at American University to do a residency in October, the second day I was there, I woke up about 5 in the morning with such bad vertigo, everything in my world was twirling. I'd never had any experience like that before. I was very frustrated because I was invited to do a physics colloquium, if you can believe this, as an artist, to physicists, and I couldn't do it because I was in the emergency room. And what you're seeing here is you're seeing an MRI of a fairly large brain tumor that I had on my optic nerve. So can you imagine getting ready to do a physics colloquium and then be rushed to the emergency room and find out that the thing that you study, you've been studying for all these years as an artist, has stopped you in its tracks. What's interesting to me, the optic nerve is so significant in terms of how we know, because it takes in data from the eye and then it shoots it back to the visual cortex and it comes out again. And here I looked at this image, it's like a cotton ball. The good news is it was found. I happened to be at an incredible hospital with an incredible neurosurgeon, and a month later it was removed. But the recovery took quite a while. And so as I'm recovering, this quote of Picasso came to me. I never made a painting as a work of art. It's all research. And so my surgery was in November. I was encouraged to go into my studio in December. I couldn't do any sculpture because I had such bad double vision and triple vision. When I go to reach for something, I wasn't hitting it yet. And so what I decided to do was to just create a visual diary of what I was experiencing. So I did a whole series of paintings. I've done about 25 or 30 paintings, a painting a day. This was actually the first one I did. And they're like automatic drawings. I looked at this thing and I said, oh my God, that's exactly what that vertigo felt like. It was so interesting to me that I felt like these drawings, I was just sort of channeling what was ever going through my body and through my very limited sight at the time. I'm just going to show you 3 of them. This one was so interesting because when I looked at it, I thought, wow, that almost looks like what I'm imagining was going on in my brain, you know, after this tumor was removed.
Did you also have issues with vision, like double vision?
Yeah, oh, during this whole period of time I did. The good news is New Year's Eve day, I decided to go to an ophthalmologist, and I went in there to her office, and she knew what was wrong. I had like 2 hours of tests. She said, I can correct this. And now they have prisms in my glasses. So I have 2 prisms in my glasses that have totally corrected the double vision. I also showed her that MRI I showed all of you, and she said, "Oh my God, I can't believe it. Your neurosurgeon was a genius," because she was able to look through my optic nerve and she couldn't believe how good it looked. So
That's pretty amazing.
a crisis opportunity, I'm a firm believer. And the final thing I want to end with today is I was coming home on the train from Penn, probably about 6 weeks ago. And it was right when the coronavirus was starting to, come to the forefront. And all of a sudden I went, coronavirus, wait, corona. And so I went back to my research that I was doing with this physicist at AU, and I thought, oh my God, I have this vision for this piece I want to do. And so what you're seeing here is the sun's corona. And then I want to show you some images of the coronavirus. And I thought, oh my God, this is like at the micro level and that's at the macro level. And then this is the last piece that I've just created called Corona. And it's been inspired by my research of solar, the dynamics and the poetics of solar corona in relationship to the coronavirus. And to me, this is just a beginning. And what I know for some people, viewers, the concept of the sculpture may cause a feeling of discomfort in the relationship of a dichotomy of beauty versus death. Because I know some people look at this and it represents beauty, but some people look at it and it represents death. But for me, at this moment in time, the COVID-19 has become a meditation and a muse for my work. And the virus has been a catalyst, I think, for extraordinary kindness of humanity, creating much light and much hope in this time of darkness. So I want to thank you all. My last image here is a wonderful quote of Leonardo da Vinci where he says, learn how to see, realize that everything connects to everything else. Thank you very, very much.
That was really beautiful. Thank you very much, Rebecca.
Okay, now I need to, let me see if I can get out of this. Okay.
You can go ahead and if anyone has any questions for Rebecca, you can unmute yourself and ask her directly.
Hey, everyone.
Hi.
Hi, Rebecca.
I now I recognize you put your name with your face. I used to live in Northern Virginia as well. And so have moved to Wilmington, Delaware.
Oh, fabulous.
I'm an artist, a member of Touchstone Gallery down in Washington, D.C. So it's my pleasure to meet you, and I really enjoyed your discussion.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. It's hard. I mean, it's hard to sort of walk people around a studio. I feel like for me, it just made more sense to talk about some of the research that I'm doing and the work that it's inspiring.
Definitely. I have a question about your current research into the process of discovery and curiosity. Is everyone different? Does everyone have a different process that's unique to them, or are there like certain groups or types that are the same?
There are different groups, and actually Perry Zern, who is Danny Bassett's brother, is a philosophy professor at American University, and I'm collaborating with him up at AU. And he has distilled different groups, and it depends on how you research. For the Knot study, it's really interesting. What they did was they did a pilot study. I wasn't part of it because I'm more a visual learner, but what they did is they worked with Wikipedia. And what they did was they had people every day for a half an hour, they would go on Wikipedia and they would search certain things. And depending on whether you're one of those people on Wikipedia that, just goes directly to the information you want, or if you're those people that hit every blue button like I do, that determines how people learn. And I would recommend, Perry has a new book out on curiosity where he talks about these different types of learners or different types of curiosity. I'm considered a dancer because I hop from one thing to another. Some people are more linear. They research things more in a straight line. Some people jump out, then jump back in, but I hop all over the place. I'm like a bunny. And I've always been that way, even as a kid. So.
Well, talking about your process, you've mentioned that you've had many different collaborations with scientists and sound artists and poets. How do you get connected with all these people, and what does that process look like?
Because I'm curious, sometimes I will reach out and write to people whose either research looks interesting. Susan Alexander was really interesting. I was desperate to find someone who dealt with sound around the periodic table of elements. And so I do a lot of Google searching, and I found her after months and months and months of trying to locate someone. We met online, we deeply connected the first time, and not only that, we share the same birthday. There are only 365 chances of that happening. And actually, Susan and I have been collaborating partners since probably 2009.
Wow.
Yeah, a long time.
We've done many different projects together.
Right. Just about all the installations, she's created these really wonderful sound interpretations.
Cool.
Hi, Rebecca. This is Gia, your neighbor.
Oh, hi.
Hi. It's interesting. We didn't really get a chance to talk a lot in the neighborhood, but we're doing this online. But it's very interesting talk, and thank you very much for the information and your experience you have shared with us. I have a quick question. I'm thinking about, when you collaborate with all these scientists, right? Then you take their research into your work to create your art. And that makes me feel almost like a biographer writing about someone. And then you have your interpretation, you're looking at their personal experience, how you write it, represent it, maybe resonate or relate or not 100% as what the person itself wanted to be represented. Do you have that, when you're working with those scientists, do you have that, I don't know, sometimes it's alignment, sometimes maybe it's a conflict or a clash, and then how do you reconcile that? How do you work? Do you feel I don't know if there's, how does that process look like?
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, because a lot of times, well, let me just say I'm very intuitive. And also let me say, I have no formal training in science. The last time I had science was in high school. I didn't even have to take it in college because, I was both in art education and also in fine arts. But I, like I said, I'm very intuitive. And on one project that Susan and I worked on called Portal, which deals with general relativity. It was in honor of the 100th anniversary of general relativity. We worked with a scientist who studies black holes up at MIT. And I flew up to Boston. I met with him for a really long time. He actually grew up in Doylestown. Talk about a small world. Mm-hmm. And just listening to him and reading things he wrote, and I created this installation, and he was really moved about how he felt I was able to distill all the information that he researches about black holes into this installation. He's very moved by it. And I don't understand how it works because, like I said, I have no science background, but I listen to what the scientists have to say. I try to decipher their papers. I look a lot at their visuals and try to understand and interpret their visuals. But I have gotten incredible feedback from scientists, and they always want to know. They said, how do you know this stuff? You have no training in science. And again, I think it has to do with curiosity. I think everything around us communicates with us, if we listen to it, and I think some people come into the world very deeply connected to that world around them. I feel like I've been very blessed of being one of those people that are able to do that. So I don't know how it works. That's why I'm curious to be part of this curiosity work, to try to understand, to see what it looks like. I was just fascinated at all the architecture that goes on in the brain, just so we can have these ideas. Is just totally fascinating to me.
I really, can I just jump in, or do you?
Oh, yes, go ahead.
Okay. My name is Nazanin. I really enjoyed your talk. Your work is really inspiring. And I wonder, I have a science background and I'm also an artist, and I see a lack of curiosity among scientists, physicians, a high rate of burnout, particularly now. How do you feel like your work could penetrate some of these burnt out, uncurious people through no fault of their own, and kind of remind them to be curious and remind them of the beautiful basis for what they are studying or working with?
Well, I think you bring up a really excellent point, because one of the first lectures I got to do while I was still teaching college, I was invited up to Harvard to present at the Center for Astrophysics. And I have to tell you, I was told later I was at the lectern that Einstein lectured at, and I was probably sucking in his molecules, which, oh my God, I was glad I didn't know that prior. But what was so interesting to me was when I came into that room, it was filled, I couldn't believe, from front to back, with scientists who had come to hear my lecture. They didn't know me, they just knew a little snippet of what I was going to talk about. And I was so moved at their curiosity of giving them permission, because I think a lot of times when artists come into a situation like this, you give people in another field permission to tap into their creative side. And as a result of that, just that one lecture, I was invited to come back to Harvard multiple times to intersect and interact with some of their astrophysicists. And it was just wonderful, because I think I'm not a threat to a scientist, because they, first thing I say when and I do a lot of lecturing in scientific communities, I'm not trained in science. Everything I'm presenting to you is just out of my curiosity and my intuition. And so when you give people permission, I'm giving them permission, they're giving me permission, they're really open. I have had incredible dialogues with scientists, over the, last 10, 15 years. And I think it's wonderful what you're doing. And I have met a lot of scientists that are involved in the arts, either theater, music, a lot of them in music, because I think there's a real relationship between music and scientific inquiry. So I think it's great. Keep up the work.
Thank
Hey,
you.
Rebecca.
Hi. Oh, hi, Matt. How are you?
I am well. It's good to see you.
Thank you.
I have a kind of a ringer question. You know what I'm going to ask.
Uh-oh. Does it have to do with libraries?
It does not.
Okay.
In sort of the 20th century, there became a divergence between art and science in some strange way that you have been able to rebuild. But as you see me sitting in the height of the 18th century, that was not always the case, right? I mean, art and science were very tightly aligned.
Correct.
Before you take pictures of microscopic things, people drew them. So could you talk a little bit about how, and this is why it's a ringer question, because I know you've done this, but how artists were so important in the development of science and the representation of science?
Well, Matt, that's a great question. So what's interesting is before the advent of the cameras, scientists had to be artists. It's the only way that they could capture what they were seeing. And so you see back in the 18th, 19th century, these beautiful drawings, not done by artists, but done by scientists. But nowadays, scientists now use cameras, digital, to capture things. I have this theory. When I was at the Cajal Institute in Madrid, I got to look through the microscope that Cajal used. And it was really quite fascinating to me because I had this epiphany. What I realized is when you're drawing something, when you're looking through it through the microscope, it enables you time to process and understand what you're seeing. And I feel that that's really lost in this digital age that we live in, because what happens is scientists very quickly snap an image and they're on to the next thing. Where someone like Cajal would spend hours looking through his microscope, and the same thing with astronomers looking through telescopes, and they would draw and capture what they were seeing. And I feel like that is really lost in the 21st century. And I have lectured about that to scientists, and they're very fascinated about it because most of them are too young to remember when scientists had to draw. But, you know, I think cognitively there's something that's being lost by just digitally shooting images. Did that answer your question?
It did.
Okay.
We also have a question from Deidre. Deidre, do you want to ask Rebecca?
Sure. Hi. How are you doing?
Hi.
Thank you for your nice talk.
Thank you.
I'll try to give some video too here so it's not a void of the image you're just talking to. I work with the engineering lab, and it's really interesting to hear how that you are like digging into the research at a deeper level than just like reading the abstract and being like, I have no idea what that just said. So I'm kind of curious, like, your process for doing that, if you could like elaborate, and in particular, if you could talk a little bit more about energy landscapes, because that's a term that comes up in our lab, which I've recently become interested in how they illustrate what that looks like when they talk about it, because it's a very, and I am not even sure that their version of energy landscape is what Danny Bassett is talking about. So even though they're both engineers, it could be very
right, because Danny is, I mean, and that's the interesting thing. Someone like Danny is coming at it from neuroscience and engineering. And I think what's interesting in this day and age, we have scientists who, you know, science to me on a lot of levels is very myopic. You know, scientists are looking at one small thing because that's what they get grants for. Where when I'm looking at something, I'm looking at it more holistically. Another thing I want to share with you is I'm actually dyslexic, and I learned differently growing up as a kid. It was very challenging, trust me. I nearly didn't even get to go to college because it was before we even had the word dyslexia. So I think part of the way I understand things is more as a visual learner. And actually I work with, I lecture sometimes to dyslexic students because I think it's important for them to understand that we all learn differently. So I just want to mention that. So I tend to be much more of a visual learner. I don't sit down and read books. I mean, obviously sometimes I will read papers and certain words will jump out at me, more visual words. When people write papers. And it's interesting because some scientists are just poetic when they write these papers, where other ones, you know, it's like, oh my God, I feel like I need a root canal. But anyway, it's interesting because it's stylistic, I think, you know, in terms of how they do it. In terms of energy landscape, what I'm understanding is it's very much like any landscape. It's being defined by the topography, you know, how things are upper, lower, and then how those things are charted. And I would think that would be that way in terms of maybe engineering. I know nothing about engineering, so I really can't speak to that. But of course, now you've got me curious. So now probably after I get off, I'm probably gonna have to look into engineering because I am very interested in this notion of fundamental forces. And I know fundamental forces do impact things in engineering and everything else in the universe.
Hi, Rebecca. So good to see you.
Hi, Patricia. Hi.
So thank you so much for your presentation. I mean, everybody needs some inspiration right now, and your work is always inspiring. I just wanted to say hello, and I wanted to say thank you for sharing that poem, that poetry piece that came out of the Salzburg Global Seminar, because obviously, as you know, that's where we met. And like you, I'm not a scientist, but there was something about that neuroscience of art experience in Salzburg that was so incredibly inspiring that, several years out, I'm still collaborating with people from Salzburg, but also other people from Salzburg, and an inspired work of my own. And so it was a treat to get to see one of the pieces that came out of that.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that, Patricia. Patricia was someone that I didn't know prior. When we were at this seminar, we had first lunch together, and established we were both dyslexic and have done really extraordinary things. So a shout out to people who are dyslexic. I think it's just a whole new way of envisioning information and curiosity.
And
I also want to say just one last thing to you, because you were talking about how some scientific papers are so boring, it's like getting a root canal. So I want to share with you one of my favorite quotes of all times, which is by Eric Gerson. He was a biologist, and he said, "Hell is sitting on a hot stone reading your own scientific publication." And I think that's pretty much true.
Thank you. That's great.
It's so good to see you.
Same here. Take care, Patricia.
All right, I guess we have time for one more question from the audience.
I think people are hungry. I hope I'm not standing in between.
I have one final question.
Oh, okay.
Do you think that artists can aid in scientific discovery?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I know that because a lot of times when I'm in a scientific situation, and I just throw something out, scientists are like, "Oh, wow, I hadn't thought about it." And I'm amazed because I think a lot of times as artists, we envision things differently. And so I think as artists, at the intersections of art and science, we invite scientists to reimagine their work. Or at least that's what I have tried to do in terms of me trying to reinterpret what I'm understanding about what they've shared with me about their research. So it is a reimagining. It's a reimagining for them as well. Definitely. So I think it's all good. It's a win-win for everyone.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Rebecca. This has been an amazing talk. I'm so glad that you were able to join us tonight, and thanks everyone for coming. I included Rebecca's website again in case you need to get in touch with her. So thank you to everyone.
Yeah, and thank you all for taking time out of your day to share it with me and allow me to share what I do.
He's wonderful.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Rebecca. It's beautiful. Thank you, Angela. Incredible. It's incredible.
Yes, thank you, Angela. Incredible. Take care. Be safe and be well, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.